Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to Molten Music Technology. Today we're looking at Hyperion, or Hyperion, one of those. It's designed by developer Paul Carter and is distributed by the Traction Corporation. It's a software, modular, multi-layered, multi-faceted, huge, epic sort of waterfall of an ocean of synthesis, of analog, of digital, of smashing, of hybrids, of modular, of nodals, architecture, effects and layering, kind of all squashing together really in a relatively baffling interface. I've spent the last couple of days with it and I'm really liking it. Bit of a spoiler straight away. I think it's pretty good. And the first way to understand how good it is, I think, is just to experience some of the sounds. So let's do that bit first. So there you go. It's pretty epic. I think you can say, I mean, it was inspired by 80s synthesizers, inspired by artists like Vangelis, like Jean-Michel Jarre. You know, Paul designed it to be this huge, fat synthesizer that brings together analog and digital forms. I mean, to me, on my first play with it, it was very reminiscent of the first time I played something like a Korg M1. The first time I experienced a Combi patch, which brought together different layers of sound that you could play together. Hadn't really ever seen that before. And it was like there was a widening of my expectations, you know. Avenues opened up, distance became closer. You kind of were seeing that how there's a new dawn of sound and music making. I mean, your hands fall upon the keys and you start to play, you start to find your way around, and Hyperion is exactly like that. And very quickly I find that I'm having a really nice time. I mean, that to me is the measure of any synthesizer. Am I having a good time? And the answer to that is yes. No, yes, no, I really am having a good time. And that's before we've even, you know, cracked the lid on it, before we've even got down into this intriguing interface of nodes and wires and bits and pieces. We haven't even got into moving a filter and we're already having a nice time. I mean, that's pretty great. And it's also great that Hyperion's able to show itself off through its presets. I mean, you know, in software synthesizers, we commonly get like 5,000 presets. I mean, what are you going to do with 5,000? I mean, you become lost in the bafflement of preset after preset going, yeah, all right. With this, though, everyone's a bit of a winner. I mean, the sound design within the presets here is just brilliant. Particularly the Combi patches, particularly the ones that layer up all sorts of stuff. It's just superb. And you don't often get to say that. You usually go scrolling and scrolling through hundreds of presets and never really getting into anything that you think is going to be a real nugget. They did a fine job on the presets. And that is ultimately what sells a synthesizer to you. Because when you first get it, you first download it, that's going to be the first thing you're going to try. And it has to be immediately impressive. And that's what this is. And then it continues to be, and there's more. And this is, oh, wow. Then you stumble upon and so on. And that's, you know, that's what a software synth needs to be. And Hyperion has that in spades. But what would probably be good at this point would be to bring you in. Let's have a look at what it is that's going on in here. See if we can peel it apart a little bit. Build a patch, maybe. Try out some other sounds. Explain as much as I can what's going on within this thing. Because there are deep levels of possibility within here. That makes it a bit of a synthesis playground. An adventure playground, I would say. An assault course. Maybe an Iron Man run. Is it a triathlon? I don't know. I don't really know what I'm talking about anymore. It's fun. Let's have a look. Now, Hyperion presents you with a potentially baffling interface when you first run it. Where's the synth? Where's all the knobs and sliders? Is the first thing that throws itself up when you start something. And it's a good question. Because I just want to play with the filter. How does one get to play with the filter? Well, in Hyperion, you've got a number of different views that all take place within this same window. On the left-hand side, you've got your presets and also your layers. So in this column, you have your layers of patches. Each patch is one of these, and you can add patches to each other to build up a layered combination synthesizer. At the bottom, you've got a bit of information about various nodes when you select them, and also you've got note effects in the arpeggiator and information on modulation sources. Great, so how do you actually change anything? Well, the things that you can change appear over here once you've selected them. So if I select the oscillator, for instance, I then get a little panel on it here with knobs, well, half moon type knobs. Which I can then play with. If I go to the filter, the low pass filter here, as I click on more things, they all appear in the column with the last thing that I clicked on at the top. So over time, as you navigate your way through your patch, you kind of create this side panel of different windows. Now, in some ways that can be a bit disorientating, because when you're using a synthesizer, you're used to having some kind of layout, some sort of consistency, where you have your oscillators here and your filter over here and your envelope somewhere in the middle, your effects at the bottom, that sort of thing. There's a tradition, if you like, in synthesizers and the way things are laid out. Hyperion doesn't do with any of that. It throws these up wherever it was you clicked last. And that's either innovative and exciting or kind of weird and unhelpful, depending on which way you see these things. I guess the idea is that your focus is always being pulled towards the modular window in the middle. And while that's certainly the interesting place to play, it does somewhat make it difficult to find the things intuitively that you're after. You're always having to click on something to access its controls, as opposed to just reaching out and doing it. But I guess the alternative is to like draw a veil across all of this, like you would with reactor panels, the panels in front of a reactor patch, and just access that. But then you would miss the glorious nodal architecture that lurks beneath. And I think this is where Hyperion wants you to play more than anything. It's probably better to illustrate this sort of thing with a much simpler patch. So the simplest one I can find in here is this sine wave one. Single oscillator into a filter to an audio out, couple of envelopes, and this note input bar at the top, which is what gives you your note count, your MIDI keyboard access to the nodes within this patch. So everything, if you like, happens between the note input and the audio output down here. Everything else is tied in between those two nodes. So they call these nodes. A node is simply a software way of naming a module. It's an intersection of functions. It's a function within a little block that has inputs and outputs. That's all a node is. If you imagine a node to be a Eurorack module, that's essentially what it is. A node is a thing with a function that has inputs and outputs. That's all that is. That's all a node is. It's not trying to be clever or different. It's just how you describe these things in software more commonly in the software world. So if we just look at the parts we've got here individually, we've got a note input at the top. And here we can dictate how many voices it has, down to monophonic, or up to, oh, which way does it go? To go sideways, it go up and down? I'm not entirely sure. 32. You've got things like glide. You've also got these interesting things here, which is randomization and drift. These introduce instability to give you a bit more of an analog feel to things. So let's stick a bit of that in, I think, would be good. In the oscillator, we have the normal controls of pitch and tuning, but you've also got panning, you've got shape, you've got unison, which is particularly lovely, and again some more randomization and changes in order to give it an analog feel. Now this is the analog oscillator. There are other oscillators that we'll come to in a minute, but within here you've got different waveforms: triangles, squares, sawtooths, buzz, digisaws, polyphonic saws, Jupiter saws, and such like, which get really interesting as you add some unison. Saw. Square wave. really nice just there, just on an oscillator. A couple of envelopes and a filter. It's really nice. I like it. I like it. It's good. It's fat, it's wide, it's moving. You know, the emulation of analog circuitry, to me, it sounds really, really good. Just lovely. Then if we look down into the filter, if I turn off this envelope for the moment. Super good. What I could do quickly, if I add a macro, these refer to these 8 knobs that run along the bottom, which I've got mapped to my knobs on the keyboard. And this just gives you a really quick way of mapping MIDI directly into it. You can do it in other ways too. You can map individual controller numbers with individual nodes and get very deep to it. But this just gives us 8 macro controls that you map into anything you like, and it's very, very quick and easy. So I'll take number 8, plug that into the resonance, 7 into the cutoff. That way I can take my hands off the mouse and start playing with a few knobs. There's a number of filters in here. That's I can't remember what these refer to, but I'm going to make a stab at the MG ones being Moog filters, OB being Oberheim. You know, I'm sure you know what the rest mean. Just going to bring these down, because I mean, one thing that doesn't quite happen is that your MIDI control of the knob doesn't change the knob that you see here. Any control over another function is using the value of that knob as its offset. So in order to take full control from this knob, I need to wind that down to 0. Does that make sense? And then there's the fullness of the filter and the resonance. Just going to try the Oberheim one, which is quite nice. Put a bit of an arp on. That envelope back in. And an envelope ADSR, as you'd expect to find. just to pretty it up, let's add some effects. I mean, this couldn't be a simpler patch. I'm just using a single oscillator, a sawtooth wave, a filter, a couple of effects, and I'm happy as Larry. So, does it have more than this? Good God, yes. I'm never going to be able to cover the depth and complexity and versatility of this. All I can do is give you a bit of an idea and talk about what I like about it. So in our modular adventure playground, we have voice generators, which are oscillators, a mono or stereo. Got a Wavesequencer, which is a wavetable oscillator, 4-operator FM, an FM wavetable, I guess that's different, a plucked string, so a model string, and also a flute one there as well, a sample player, and a sound font player.
One, two, one, two, three, four, 10, 1, 2.
Let's go back to our simple patch of just a nice saw wave. And let's add in some other bits and pieces. I mean, once you've generated your sound, you've then got processors like filters, distortion, some interesting things like a granulator. You've got a tube resonator. You then got sort of boring things like mixers and bits and pieces for mixing your audio together. And then you've got control nodes. Control nodes are your modulators, your envelopes, your LFOs, that sort of thing. We just pick up an LFO. These are useful all over the place, so just jam it into your filter or whatever. Now, one nice feature of Hyperion is this bottom area here where you can look at your modulation sources. If you select a node that's being modulated, so the input on the filter at the moment, it gives us a display of exactly what's going on, plus the things that are plumbed into it. This is essentially where your VCAs are, because there's an absence of VCAs. VCAs we commonly use in modular synthesis to combine signals, to control the level of different signals, and there isn't really that functionality within here. It's built into individual nodes. So on every single control input into something, you have the ability to control how much of something is going into it. So as I change the low frequency oscillator, you can see it change here. If I do something more with the envelope, I can also throw that in. So it gives a rather nice graphical representation of every voice as it happens. And you can see the envelopes riding on the sine wave. So it's by this method that you combine modulations into any node, any control point on any node you like. So with the LFO there's lots of different waveforms. You can sync it to tempo or have it just freeform. And so on. You've also got all voice controls which are a bit more global, so they act over the entire patch. There's MIDI nodes in order to route MIDI information to and from another thing, either to and from individual layers or to and from your DAW if you're running it within a DAW. There's data viewing, where you can create a viewer like so, and it will show you whatever's coming out of whatever you want to plug it into. So if I plug it into there, it shows me the envelope output. If I plug it into the output of the LFO, it'll show me that. Then in the data processor area, you've got a whole load of maths and weird shenanigans in order to change things from this into that, to get down and dirty with all of the maths and the logic and the other possibilities within modular. There's also a clock divider in here, which is very useful. Now, Hyperion's focus is as a keyboard-based synthesizer. It's a big, fat polysynth, is really where its intention lies. So when you get into the modular engine, that's what's going on. You're really modifying a huge synthesizer as opposed to building little modular patches, although you can do that. And so the emphasis is always coming from a keyboard. It's coming from that workstation kind of vibe. And so although it does have a couple of little sequences built in, they're a bit sort of fiddly and faffy and not really well thought out, particularly. But, however, you can use them, they are usable, and you can start building entire modular environments within here which have nothing to do with the keyboard. Let me see if I can show you that. Kind of. So I'm going to kill the notes input, delete that node. There's now nothing going on. Now when you do that, it loses all polyphony and is now just a monophonic oscillator. But I still need something which is going to open the envelopes, and I need something which is going to give it sound. So there's a couple of possibilities. The first one, under generators, is an int sequencer. I think. I mean, I might be making this stuff up. I don't really know. So this is the sequencer here. 16 notes. Let's take this down to just 4 notes to make it simple. And we go 1, 2, 3, 4. That should work, right? Well, first of all, it needs a clock. So I'm going to take the clock 1 output, stick that into the top so that it runs. You can't really see anything running, but I'm going to take the output, plug that into the frequency input on the oscillator. Something may well be happening. It's really hard to know at this point. I mean, perhaps what I should do is take one of these displays, bring that over here a little bit, and take that in to see if there's something going on. Well, yeah, something's going on. That wasn't particularly helpful. Right. Anyway, so let's we need to take the trigger output from the sequencer, plug that in to the envelope that is going to be opening this. Now, the envelope that opens the audio output is the one over here. That's the one I'm going to need to be triggering. There we go. That wasn't hard, was it? Now if I go back to the LFO, I can put that into tempo sync, then bring it down a little bit faster. Then I'm going to take out that LFO for the minute. Do something more interesting with the envelope. So this envelope also needs to be triggered, and at the moment it's not being triggered, but I can pull the trigger that's going into that top envelope into the bottom one. So now they're both being triggered. So I can now create perhaps another sequence alongside this one using a different oscillator or the same oscillator or an entire duplication of what I've got here, if I so wish. But let's take hold of the sequence, the oscillator, the filter, and the two envelopes. I'm going to duplicate them. Bring them all over here out of the way a little bit. Now, in order to trigger the envelope on the oscillator, I need to run that through a VCA, but it doesn't have one. All it has is this audio output here. So I'm going to need to create a little mixer in order to be able to do both of these things. So I'm going to take the output of the first pattern, plug that into input 1, and I'm going to take the output of the mixer into the audio out here. The audio out is what essentially connects you to your sound card or to the effects bus, which is something we've got going on here which we're not using. So I take the output of the second oscillator, plug that into input 2. So I'm going to run a different clock from the clock divider into my sequencer here. That's going to be triggering the envelope, and I'm going to bring the output of the envelope into controlling the level here. The envelope on the other one also needs to go into there. I need to disconnect it there. Okay, that's awesome. So audio output, need to put up. Now I could take these macros to do exactly the same thing on the other filter. So there you are. There's a simple patch running within an environment in Hyperion. It's just putting together a couple of oscillators in an old-fashioned modular way, running a couple of sequences together. But it's easy and engaging to patch together. It's not like something like Reactor, which just boggles and melts my brain, so I don't have any clue really what I'm doing, and I kind of give up the will to do it anyway. That doesn't really happen here, because things are straightforward enough for you to explore what they do and understand the differences. The displays are really useful. You can plop those around the place and see what's going on as you go. It's not anywhere near as animated as I would like. I would love all of the panels here to move in response to either MIDI control or modulation or something like that, but they don't. They sit there as offsets. They know what they are, that's their value, and anything else you move to it is going to be subject to those. And that's all right. But this is software, and in software I've got to the point in my life where I kind of demand more. I want more visual clues, because it's software and you can do it. You're not having to pay for LEDs and halos and special mechanical devices that you would have to do on a physical piece of hardware. In software, there's very little excuse for not having masses and masses of visual information to tell you exactly what's going on. So there's a little bit of this being completely static while everything's happening. So, put my sequence back on. There's modulations moving about, there's waveforms being turned inside out and sequences going on, but you can't see any of that happening. You can scatter displays around the place, and that's helpful, but it doesn't give you the full picture. So I would like more animation, more signs as to something is actually going on. You have a little oscilloscope display at the top, but it doesn't really give you a whole lot of information. It tells you that something's going on, sure, but that's really about it. Now, all of this is happening within a single layer. You can have 16 layers stacked on top of each other to produce the bigger instrument that you could possibly dream of. So you could have layers and layers of this, but also you can start to move modulations between layers. There's like with the macros, there's a little node you can throw in which will send whatever you plug into it from one layer, and it will appear in another layer. Then you stick another receive node there. So you can take a modulator from one place, feed it into another, or a sequence from one place, feed it into another. It's very interesting. You can also do it with effects. So there's a whole load of effects in here. I mean, in the green area of stuff, along with reverbs and choruses, you have got distortions, ring modulation, bit crusher, EQs, pitch shifting, flanging, a number of different reverbs. All of that can be chained together as well, and you can create an entire effects chain as a layer and route audio to it and back out again. So that way you can use it as an effects processor. And with the current version that's just arrived, he's included an audio input, so you can use Hyperion purely as an audio effects processor. You can route audio in, back out again, through things wherever you like, but also from between layer to layer. So you take a layer, the output of whatever it is that's doing, route it to another layer which has a whole stack of effects you've just loaded up, and back out again, and then maybe to another layer with something else on. You could have a layer just full of reverb and route everything through that at the end of something, I suppose. I mean, the possibilities are endless. I mean, which is one of those things people say a lot, but it does tend to be that way. You can keep on threading and threading. I mean, the patching I've shown here is just the easiest, simplest way of creating a couple of oscillators and getting stuff going on. If you're into wavetables, there's a whole load in here, and you can import your own. If you're into sound fonts, if you've got a sound font library, you want multi-sampled piano and violins, you can do that in here. You want to play samples? No problem, there's a sample player. You want to add stuff together in some kind of binary mathematical logic gate explosion? You can do that in here. There's tons and tons, but when you really get down to it, it just sounds brilliant. It sounds really good. The oscillators sound great, particularly when you start sticking in unison, particularly when you add a little bit of effects, especially when you start modulating. Go through some of those really nicely modelled filters. It just builds and builds and builds into this amazingly evolving texture of modulated awesomeness. Yeah, I quite like it. You can, of course, build your own layers of stuff. So if I bring in a single patch, I can have that as my starting point for whatever reason. And I can create another layer, and I can stick in just sort of a random thing, really. How about a nice flute? Oh, let's just double click that in, is what you do. So now I've got flute in with my bubbles. Let's add another one. Let's add a dreamy organ. See, and that is just brilliantly nuts. That's what I like. But then, within the layer section over here, you can pull together the note range and velocity range that it can use. So you can layer stuff up in the way you would with a workstation keyboard, or a large MIDI controller, or one of those big synths. So you only have the bits where you want them to be. That's the worst example of combining a patch I think I've ever seen. Let's try that again. So we'll take a thing, we'll take one of those, we'll take one of those. So there's C3. I'm going to make the pulses happen above C3. Oh, that's really nice. So it's just as simple as that. I could add a macro node and then map that to different parts within it and have all my 8 knobs ready to feed into the next thing that I want to do. This is only version 1 of Hyperion. It's only been out a little while, a week or so, and already there's new bits coming along and further developments and feedback he's getting from users. He's already throwing into the mix. I mean, hence we have a clock divider that wasn't there until I sort of pointed it out to him that it would be a good idea. There's other things like standalone ASIO drivers have come along since it's come out, which again is something I kind of pushed him on in order to get the performance good. But there's new stuff coming along all the time. He's talked about working on a proper step sequencer to have down in this bottom section here, which I think would be excellent, because the sequencing, although I did demonstrate it within Hyperion, is a bit fiddly and a bit faffy, and it took me ages to work out what the heck was going on. But if it had its own step sequencer within it that you could address directly like you do the Arpeggiator, I think that would have a lot going for it. But also within the modular environment, I mean, Paul, the developer, doesn't come from hardware modular. He comes from the world of synthesizers. And as I say, the emphasis of this is onto big workstation synths, not modular necessarily, although obviously the interface is modular. But it's modular in a software node kind of way. So it's working in a way that his brain interprets the individual aspects of a synthesizer and how they work together and how they control and interact. So he's not following the roadmap of Eurorack or Modular or anything else down that road. This is different to that, and in many ways it's refreshing and interesting and not difficult to get into, but also there's some tripwires where you go, well, but why doesn't this do the I'm expecting this or I'm expecting that because I'm familiar with hardware. And initially I hit a bit of frustration with that because where the heck is a VCA? Can I just have a VCA? Can I just have a clock? Would that be possible? Simple things like that. But all those things are within there. They just have to be teased and tugged out because the way of describing it is in a software programming way as opposed to a hardware modular way. But I have I have every confidence and high hopes for Hyperion that it's just going to get better and better. I've really enjoyed playing with these last few days, more so than I imagined. I sort of sat down, I've got to review a piece of software. What software? Synth? Oh, great. But very quickly, those cynicisms, those bits of like, I'm all about the hardware now these days, were quickly overturned because it sounds so great. It's on a level, I think, with something like Omnisphere. It has that vibe of bringing together huge layers of sound. And it does have that very familiar big synth 80s, 90s vibe about it. It's great. I've enjoyed it a lot. Obviously, I could go on about it forever, and I don't want to do that because you should go and discover it for yourself. So this has been my first dive into this thing, show you a bit of the modular, show you some of the sounds. I hope that's given you some kind of glimpse as to what it's all about. So there you are. It's called Hyperion, and it's available over on traction.com for macOS and Windows, both standalone and as a plugin. Go and check it out, and in the meantime, go and make some tunes.